I remember because I had okay, cool. It's gotta be in live stream.
Yeah, just keep rapping because this is gonna be like a John Coltrane. Cool.
Yeah, I remember when I went to the Graduate Center. It was in August 2001, and I came to New York because I was born in New York. New York was always like my family's home base, my stomping ground. When I thought of cities, I always thought of New York. You know, I just had the smell of the subway in my hair from really early. So when I came back as a man, though, I had to stake my own space in a city that was a constant race, acts of collision all over, Right. And I remember I came back in August. It was also it was 2001. So the 90s vibe was still there. The city was gritty, but parts of it had been swept clean by Disney. Right. So you could walk around in a mouse's outfit and not get mugged.
Right.
And so I came back and just started playing, right? Drugs were everywhere in the city, but there were more kind of the hippie psychedelic stuff. A lot of the harder, like, Coke had kind of ebbed out a little bit because they got tainted with the finance bro type. So cocaine wasn't
downtown was still downtown still had the dominant club scene. And the club
had a club scene, strong club scene, lots of drag queens, lots of kids grinding their teeth on ecstasy. Oh, how you doing? Oh, yeah. Right. So I came in August 2001 and I was just like ready to party and get into theory. And then September happened. Right. And it was an earthquake. When the towers fell, it was like an earthquake went through the whole city and it shattered all of our naivete and all of our illusions in this ephemeral, shiny kind of rainbow bubble of the 90s that had been kind of blown up by the internet bubble, by the speculative capital bubble, and by the bubble of ecstasy and psychedelics and all night partying. This bubble had just inflated. And so, yeah, I remember there was a hard turn, at least in the Graduate Center, towards realpolitik, and we had to get grounded very quickly. So it wasn't that people abandoned deconstruction or post-structuralist thought, but it became sharper and more grounded on how do we deconstruct the propaganda that was going to be coming out of the White House and the security paranoia that was going to be raining down upon us. And yeah, I critical theory took a much more hard political turn, and so that was like when I really started coming up with that. And it didn't, that sense of being an embattled global majority against the war, but helpless in some ways to stop the machinery of the state from bombing the fuck out of Iraqis. That sense of helplessness against especially the Bush administration really didn't end until Hurricane Katrina. Like that's when it snapped. Like when people saw George Bush looking like a bumbling idiot, out of the plane and people were holding up babies, that's when this veneer of invulnerability, incompetency, and this almost like terrifying, I'm going to take charge Texan cowboy, that just shattered, because we were like, this guy's a fucking idiot. It's like, if he can't even get like a Black Hawk helicopter to like pick up a family from a fucking rooftop, like, why are we scared of this asshole? So that was when it popped. But in terms of the culture of critical engagement,
I think that was like when I think the twin, because you had multiple failures in the Bush administration, and so the first failure was the fact that he wasn't elected, right? So there's three failures, three major failures. One, he wasn't elected. And at least it started this kind of cascade of like Republicans being villainously unpopular, but somehow being elected, right? So the question around popular will and like popular politics began to shift from masses of numbers to narrative, right? And so so for me, like Trump is a master of like narrative, but like, Republicans are masters of narrative, but they can never win in terms of like the sense of the popular will. They just bull people over. But then like the second part was like what you mentioned was like 9/11. And then the third part was like you said, was Katrina. And all this is happening in New York City, and the multiplicity of like republicanism that happened in New York City, which is like really kind of like, it was really funny because I remember 9/11 that day. 9/11 was an election day.
Yeah.
You know, the Democratic primary was happening that day. Fernando Ferrer, who wasn't a great candidate, versus Michael Bloomberg.
Yep.
And actually canceled the election that day. And when the smoke cleared, no pun intended, the question therefore become like, who's the serious candidate? And so what you had with Bloomberg is you had a direct representative of the ruling class.
Yeah.
Taking hold of the politics of the city. And I guess for me, like, I mean, this maybe is an entryway to this conversation. I don't know whether or not, and this is what's so provocative about your article, because it seems to me like Eric Adams, you know, if we're talking about Eric Adams and the relationship is black people being played by Eric Adams, it's funny because I feel like Bloomberg had a black card, and Bloomberg had an understanding of that. My memory of Bloomberg was simply two things. One is that he had absolutely no opposition to the Atlantic Yards project.
Daddy?
Silencing.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. So the article that you're referencing, right, is Eric Adams playing black voters, which is in the newest issue of the Indy and can be found at popular bookstores everywhere. Go ahead, Drew, give me the tablet. I'll fix it. Go ahead, give me the tablet. My son's here, folks. I'm fixing his tablet. We're both gonna have screen time tonight. All right.
I know exactly what you're talking about, bro.
Yeah, you know.
True is like, let this interview go on for 3 hours.
Oh yeah, if you could do Paw Patrol, he's like, Daddy, you're under arrest, and I'm just like, I can't breathe, and then.
Oh man,
too soon.
I remember those days, Paw Patrol. But you were saying, well, like maybe we'll
anyway.
Start.
So the thing about
so like I don't know. Let's introduce the live stream properly because we did this like
I know we just kind of floated.
Like let's drop into the conversation kind of like thing, but like so let me just explain. Like so, yo, what's up? My name is Kazembe Balagoon. This is an Uptown Report. We're doing a live stream tonight. First time ever that I'm doing a live stream on YouTube. Actually, set up the whole entire thing tonight. Make sure it's archived. We're here tonight with Nick Powers, a good friend of mine, journalist, poet, social agitator, professor at SUNY Westbury. And he recently wrote an article in the latest, the February edition of the Indypendent called "Is Eric Adams Playing Black People?" Provocative article, right? One that really kind of goes into the nature of Eric Adams's, election and the challenges to the left. And so I want to welcome you formally, Nick. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Brother, thank you. I'm giving you a totally consensual hug from Brooklyn. Wrapping my arms around you.
I received that consensual, sensual hug too. Thank you so much. And love to talk to you, love to hear what you have to think. And so maybe this is starting off with us tonight and just kind of going to, you was going to start before, but you wrote this article. Where did this article come from for you in terms of talking about Eric Adams and is he playing black people?
Fear. I didn't want to write it. Because there was a buzz in the air, like the brother just got in. It's the first black man to be mayor of New York since Dinkins. And there was a honeymoon period. There still is a honeymoon period. And, I didn't want to write this article and people look at it in the Indy be like, fuck this Nick Powers, because they would be like, this guy just got in, give him a break, And so I didn't want to write it. And so my writing process is that I start with whatever I'm scared to say or most ashamed to say first. And when I start there, it just takes out a lot of unnecessary dawdling, circling the drain, a lot of defense mechanisms. And once I just say what I'm scared to say or I'm ashamed to say first, I write it down, on pen and paper. And I look at it, and it doesn't mean that it's accurate, correct, or even smart, but at least it just needs to get written down. And so I had this inkling. I was like, Eric Adams. I was like, what is it about you that feels oddly familiar? I don't know. I can't. He's smart, cagey, brother is just on it. But then I was just like, something about you just feels like I've seen you before. And then it popped in my head. I was like, oh, he reminds me of one of those like shell game artists. You know, those guys with like the cups and
Right.
they put a pebble under it, right? And because I just saw that on the train. I was like, oh, this is like old New York. I saw this. It's such an old gimmick. You know, these people got on the train. It was a guy and a lady, and the guy was doing the game. And then he said, "Is any takers? You can win easy, $300, easy. Walk home, $300, easy.
Right.
Just put $20 down or whatever." And then
Right.
this lady's like, "I'll do it." And then she put 20 down, and boom, she wins $100. And like,
Exactly.
of course, other people were like, "Ooh, she just won $100." I was like, "Bobby, I could do $100 right now." So all of a sudden, like the guy was getting it, and I'm looking at him, and I'm just like, I was like, "Have none of you seen like Law and Order? Have none of you heard this from your uncles? Have none of your uncles done this? Have you never grown up on the stoop and watch your uncles like do shit like this?" So anyway, then all of a sudden it's like that's what Eric Adams reminds me of. He reminds me like he does that with his mouth. He's got like 3 different mouths, and he puts and he puts violent crime. Hold on, true. Lower it. You gotta lower it, baby. You gotta lower it. Lower it. Thank you. You just 1 or 2. Okay. Thank you. That's good. True. That's good. That's good. Well, then lift it up a bit. Sorry, folks. You're gonna get some dating in this. But anyway, what he does is he takes gun violence, right? So he takes gun violence and he puts it under these 3 different cups, like victim blaming. He puts it under better policing. You know, he puts it under mayor being a competent mayor, and then he just switches it all around. And at the end of the day, because he obviously loves being mayor, and he obviously loves the city. So we don't have to be juvenile in our thinking and just make him into a caricature. One, he's a very smart man. He knows how to play human chess. He knows how to get to the top and find the angles. He also knows rhetoric really well. He's a good. He knows how to use images. But it's a little bit of a shell game because he's taking the actual cause, which is mostly inequality, intergenerational trauma, and inequality in New York, and he's hiding that under one mouth, under victim blaming, under better policing, under being the first Black mayor since Dinkins, and he just swirls it all around. And so at that point, I think the people who voted for him to keep them safe are like, okay, he'll do it. It sounds good. Better policing, right? Yeah, that sounds good. Okay, let's do it. Yeah. And then it's like, yeah, but that's actually not, it's a shell game because the real causes are deeper. I mean, yeah, can you flood the street with cops? Is that going to have an effect? Yes, of course it's going to have an effect. Are you going to take thousands of guns off the street? What idiot would say that that's not going to have an effect? Of course it's going to have an effect. And that's what people want. But the problem is going to keep rising up again and again like Groundhog Day, unless you have, a deeper targeting of the deeper reasons. And ultimately that really comes down to basically like almost a third of the city being poor or near poverty. This is a working class city that's buried underneath the veneer of the rich partying on girls, Sex in the City, name your new New York sitcom, Right. So, it's just and the thing is that that's to me is like that's when I was like, I need to write this article because I need to liberate myself from the fear of throwing shade on a brother who just got to the top and who I actually kind of like his personal style, but I was just like, yeah, but I'm in terms of class consciousness, I was like, I'm not feeling where he's taking us.
It seems to me that the hesitancy that you talking about, because you mentioned David Dinkins, right? And it seems to me the hesitancy that you're talking about is a hesitancy of whatever the opposite of Black excellence is in relationship to Black leadership in the city. And so there's an undercurrent in the conversation around New York City around the bad old days, right?
Yeah.
And it's 2 bad old days that we always talk about. Is the fiscal crisis of the 1970s, when there was like the first shockwaves of which people would argue the first shockwaves of neoliberalism, and then the bad old days of David Dinkins, right? Which is like Black people are in control of the city, and things go to hell, right? And so I can imagine for you as writing this, you're saying to me that and you're saying that there's a hesitancy for us as as Black people, as Black intellectuals, Black writers, Black activists, to like criticize a brother, you know what I'm saying, based on this. And then, Eric Adams actually like uses this in terms of his own rhetoric, right? He's like during election, he's like, how dare you criticize me? Like, you know what I'm saying? I'm a brother, I'm Black, you know what I'm saying? But I think that but is there something that we need to get over in terms of this Black excellence conversation, or this idea that we can't criticize him because he's Black, as part and parcel of our own necessity of understanding what's going on in the city right now? Because it seems to me that there is a way that he's also, when you mention the shell game, he's running, he's kind of doing the shell game, but he's both running towards this kind of Black excellence, but he's also running away from history, right? So he's like, you know what I'm saying? Like this kind of double-edged sword that he's playing in terms of his own relationship to Black empowerment in the city.
Yeah, because I would say that what he's doing is in a sense almost like time traveling. So that he is poaching elements of working class authenticity that we haven't really seen since, the Black Power movement and the generation that came out of that, the generation of leadership that came out of that. And then they were shot or put in jail where they got exhausted. And so the next generation of Black and Latino leadership, at least within NYC, and, I would say nationally, but NYC was more neoliberal. So I think, David Dinkins comes out of the Jack and Jill Club elite. And so, that's a wave of middle and upper class Black power in the city. And there's always been some elements of middle and upper class Black power and Black Latino power in the city. And so he comes out of that. So he's much more of a neoliberal. And in fact, it was really under Dinkins, not under Giuliani, that the police really started to come out in force. He was the one who really kind of got that going. Giuliani continued and expanded that, but Dinkins was really the one who started to bring that in. And so Eric Adams brings in a working class authenticity, but he doesn't really bring in working class politics. And that's the thing, because he taps into a personal style that is grounded in an authentic connection to the street of New York. And he plays that up a little bit. He turns the volume up when he needs to, but that's really who he is. That's his childhood was concrete. His adolescence was in the street. And then it wasn't in the corporate suites, and so he comes up in a very different pathway. So he can appeal to a working class class as well as race in a way that Dinkins could not. But he doesn't bring into it, I would say, a hardcore edge of working class politics and solidarity with what the working class needs. But that opening is made possible, I would say, by the fact that the left that's involved mostly in media and to some extent organizing tends to have upper working class or middle class background. And because of the very demographics of the left, and because of our own particular award system,
right,
books, the podcast, the interviews, the SAT language we use, the breaking things down of historical materialism and dialectic reasoning, all that shit that when you say at a working class party, when people are throwing back shots and smoking, Lucy's or blunts, people are gonna be like, the fuck are you talking about? That because the demographics of the current left are very heavily dominated by the academic left and the media left, that there's been a class split in terms of culture. And so that means that the left has a hard time addressing what people in the street who are living in a constant state of emergency really need. They really need actually real protection from crime, because they're oftentimes the most victimized by it. They're also pitted against each other all the time because they're competing from everything from fucking washing machines and dryers, in the laundromat because everyone's squeezed in, to street corners, if it's a crew looking for turf, if it's, drug dealing and drug gangs aren't as big as it used to be, but definitely the drug trade, the sex trade, Like there's, they're fighting, constantly fighting each other, jostling each other in the streets, crew beefing with crew over social media. And parents worried not only about crime. That's one thing the parents are worried about. Everyone's worried about crime. But the thing that I think the left doesn't always get is the parents are also worried about their children being transformed into criminals by the culture of the street.
Right. I want to talk about this a little bit because I think that, part of the response, part of this platform of the Uptown Report was created out of the reaction of the last year's mayoral election. And so there was a number of podcasters, media pundits who were talking about like the older Black voter in the outer boroughs without talking to the older Black voter. And I was like, they're talking about me, right? You know what I'm saying? I live in Co-op City, and like the majority of Black people now, live in, the Black community now is out of boroughs, right? We live in Co-op City. We live in Rochdale Village. We live in Southeast Queens. I think that if you look at the politics now, the Bronx has the second highest Black population next to Brooklyn. Number 4 is Manhattan, which is unbelievable considering that at one time at Harlem, where I grew up, was a mecca of Black cultural life. You know what I'm saying? And it has the fourth largest Black population, lowest only being Staten Island, right? Yeah. So the context in which Eric Adams is coming to power is also in the context of this rapid gentrification of the city, right? And this, in the depopulation of the Black core from the city. That all that being said, there is this kind of like progressive movement that's also kind of emerged in the recent years, through Bernie Sanders' campaign, through the fight against stop and frisk, through like a lot of grassroots organizing around housing work, a lot of that stuff. But like there is, like you said, this disconnect sometimes between those movements and the actual participants in those communities. And there's a variety of different reasons for that, right? But one thing you said that was provocative in the article was that you talked about reaching out to not the working class, but the woken class, right? And I thought that was a brilliant turn of phrase, at least from my understanding, because I think that there was something to be said about how Adams was able to also co-opt the language of the progressive. So now, remember, in the beginning of this decade, it was all about populist. Now it's about progressive, right? And so Eric Adams is like kind of wearing the dress, right? He's wearing drag. He's wearing progressive drag, and he can just cite like these different statistics, but at the same time not be accountable to any type of base, which is the real metal of like a working class left movement. Are you accountable to a base, right? Are you accountable to a group of people who hold you account? That type of thing.
Yeah, he came, but see the thing, I think that he can get through, and it will be bad for a lot of us in terms of setting the stage for a deeper social movement for these reasons. One, if he floods the streets with cops and he has the trust of the police and he can talk with them and say, hey, y'all need to chill out on this thing. But if he floods the streets with cops that don't overstep their bounds in the post George Floyd protest era in BLM time, then and he creates a dramatic decrease in crime, then the working class base that fueled his mayoralty is going to stick with him because he promised them safety with respect, and if he can give them safety with respect, that's what will get him over for a second term. But what's missing is a left that has an authentic connection to the working class and poor, who are able to say, it's not enough to be safe in the moment. We have to make things safe for our kids so they don't get caught up in cycles of intergenerational trauma and poverty that make them into fucking criminals. So it's not enough to be safe from crime. It's not to be safe from criminals. You have to make it so that your children are safe enough they don't become criminals. And that's about inequality. That's about getting, help, support, healing from trauma. So, but that's a more realistic, and really, to be honest, like at this point, it's scientifically boring. Like that's, all that stuff about, trauma and psychological and mental health and, the effect of culture and the flooding of guns, like all of that stuff. I mean, you can read reports about that all day long from different think tanks. You can read it, that's boring. But unless you have a left that has an authentic connection to the working class and poor, you're never going to be able to stop someone like Adams, who's going to come in and just do a runaround. And that's what he did. Adams should never have been able to even get near Gracie Mansion. If you actually had a left that was deeply organized, deeply rooted, and able to, make very airtight, clear, concise case to the masses of people that resonated with them because it was based in reality, right?
Well, here's the thing, and this goes back to like his first test as Adams as mayor, right? And so you have these two Dominican officers who were shot, and I apologize. God rest their souls. I don't know I forgot their names. I think Wilbur Mora. I forgot the other gentleman's name. The two officers who were shot, right? Then you have the situation where that situation that led to them being shot was mother has child living with her.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? How much do we know about this in terms of our community, right? Like, what I'm saying? Son, daughter, what I'm saying, has nowhere else to go. Living with the older parents, right? I know this because the number of COVID cases in the Black community reflects this, right? Yeah. The essential worker comes home from working from DoorDash or Zip or whoever, gets home, gets COVID and gives it to the grandma, gives it to the grandfather.
Yeah.
Gives it to the kid. That's what happened in our community, right? Mm-hmm. And so this housing crisis that you're talking about, this poverty crisis, this lack of mental health support services crisis that's happens in real time in this particular case.
Yeah.
And then the situation happens. But what do we see instead of, ideas like you had mentioned around that? Even the sister Kristen Richardson, who's a councilwoman, who's a socialist councilwoman from Harlem, the first socialist councilwoman in Harlem since Ben Davis, mentions this, and then gets rammed in the press, right? New York One, New York Post, all call her a Black Bolshevik, everything imaginable, right? But that particular issue, right, is an illustration of the actuality of what's happening in our communities. Where, like, I think that there's something where we're personally hurting from this reeling of this sense of gentrification. There's a personal breaking point that we have that I think that's going on. But something you mentioned, I think is very funny, is that Adams then becomes like what? The father figure. I want you to talk about Adams, the father figure, because I think that's super important for us to have the understanding of why this is happening.
Yeah. Politics, like religion, is empowered by deep archetypes. And if you can tap into an underlying archetype, that sells you to the people without a lot of work. It just, everyone gets it. So there was an example. Dave Chappelle said that the first time he met Obama seemed to have like a halo about him. And I'm paraphrasing, but Dave Chappelle, he's like Jesus. And so there was this archetype of someone who's going to save us, the messianic leader. And then Obama himself tapped into that, saying that he was part of the Joshua generation. So he didn't say Jesus, but he was like, I'm part of the Joshua generation. So we're finally going to get you into the promised land. So he's tapping into a deep religious archetype that people instantly get. And once he sells himself, once he frames himself as the Joshua generation, then you don't have to do a lot of work. People instantly make that association, and you get the benefit of that of that endorphin, that serotonin, that joy, that rush. I'm like, okay, this person's going to help me out. So what is the great need that Eric Adams tapped into? He tapped into the fantasy of the father who comes home to set things right. The Black father who returns home, he's strong, he's capable, and he makes things right. And why is that a deep cultural need? Because there's a million missing Black men. Dead or in jail. Gone. And how many dead or in jail Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, Latino men in the city? So when you have whole communities where the men are gone, disappeared, and the young men are in the streets with guns, there is a deep desire that is expressed in the culture. You don't have to look for it. You don't even have to Google it. Just think about the stuff that we've seen growing up. Think about the strong Black man as an image we've seen over and over again. And so I cite in the article, I mean, as Officer and a Gentleman, I forgot the brother's name.
Gossett.
Huh?
Louis Gossett Jr.
Louis Gossett Jr. as the Black Sergeant. The Black Sergeant is a cliche. He's the strong Black man who takes as a surrogate son a kind of wayward white man who doesn't really know his own worth or measure. And he forces his kid to man up. Morpheus in the Matrix takes on a wayward son, right? And think about it in good times. Think about it in good times.
Right.
How the strong Black father, but then he was killed off in I think season 2 or 3. Right. And again, I'm dating myself, but this is a reoccurring image over and over again. I think about the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. I think about how Cosby, rode the strong Black father archetype. I think about the fetish that we had for Malcolm in the mid 90s when Spike Lee's 92 movie came out. We all walked around with that X hat. So I think about the way that we praised King as a strong Black father, as the Moses of the people, right up there with Harriet Tubman. So there's this, when you have families and neighborhoods and whole communities missing men, missing fathers, then as a psychological compensation, there is a deep desire to have a strong Black man come home, be resurrected like Lazarus, come back from the tomb like Jesus. And that is expressed in innumerable amounts of different culture. And so when Eric Adams comes up to the mic and he says, New York is for New Yorkers, and all those people from Ohio and whatever, they can go back to wherever they belong. And people are like, yay, finally a brother who's sticking up for us. When he refuses to try to iron out his Queen's accent, and he proudly, talks New Yorkese and he talks street, people are like, yay, finally someone's sticking up for us. And when he shows up in those crisp white shirts that are like just so blazingly bright, you think they're charged by batteries, right? And you know what I mean? Right. And shoes that are so expensive that they don't even touch the ground. He just kind of floats. Right? Because the shoes themselves don't want to get dirty. So it's like this guy, he plugs into a very deep archetype need of the strong Black man. And also he's physically strong. He's healthy. He overcame diabetes, which is something that many of us suffer from. So now he's a vegan. He's on a health kick. He actually looks healthier than I do, right? His diet works. Whatever, if you catch him eating fish, whatever, it doesn't matter. Like he obviously cares about his body. So his health. And so he beams, he radiates this kind of energy. And so the strong Black man comes home and we finally have a chance to elect him. And when we elect him, we also elect ourselves. We also, in a sense, redeem our own loss. And so there's a kind of deep psychology that happens, a transference onto Eric Adams, which is why he's in a kind of a halo honeymoon period right now. And it's going to take a while before the street starts to feel like it's got hustled. Because the street's smart. The street hustles, but you can also hustle the street. But the street, and the one way that you hustle the street is you offer it redemption, which is why the street is always very vulnerable to poverty pimps and religious charlatans. Because if you can offer, because the street, you have to do so much grime and dirt on the street. You got to sell your ass. You got to put things in your body. You got to be cruel, you got to be hustle, you got to be a shark, you got to be a jet, you got to be a crew, you got to do some crazy shit in the street. And so all that stuff weighs you down. So you want redemption. And so I think the street is always asking for protection and redemption. It's the one thing that the street is vulnerable. It's the kryptonite to the street. And so Eric Adams came in and he played us. And again, I don't think this was conscious. I don't think he's like some mean Machiavellian guy. I think he actually honestly really has a deep love for the city. I just don't think that his politics, the content of his politics is missing. So there's like an empty form, an empty kind of working class progressive form, but the content is kind of empty. And so that's why when you look at that shell game thing, you open up all those cups. There's nothing under any of those cups. There's no little bean. There's no cash. It's just all empty. And eventually the street will catch on, but I don't know if it's going to catch on in time.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's really brilliant, man. I mean, you hit so many different nails in the head. And the only thing I would add to that is that fact that I think that the strong black man archetype came after, the kind of gender revolution that happened underneath the Black Lives Matter movement, where people were concerned around female-centered leadership. And so there's a sense of like that getting swept away as well,
yeah.
And that getting pushed to the side, and in favor, we're gonna have older black men. And I'm noticing it all the time. I'm like, who's out there in terms of like claiming the mantle of like who's claiming the microphone right now? It's like Jim Clyburn, it's like Al Sharpton. It's older black men who are like now like we got to come in and be like the arbiters of the situation, as opposed to like the chaos of BLM, because we don't want a female leadership, because that's just crazy, right? Even though the notions of safety that they're promoting were extremely feminist based, right? It was about care, it was about nurturing, it was about looking out for each other, as opposed to like being under surveillance. I remember Eric Adams on his first day is like calling the police around two guys getting into a fight on the L train on like Broadway jump.
Yeah.
Like, oh my God, like, is this going to be the way that we're going to do now? We're going to do like the focus is going to be like the surveillance now. It's not going to be like it's not going to be the care anymore. It's going to be the surveillance. It's not going to be looking out for each other. We're going to be like looking at you, looking at your body, and and looking to do that to you. And and you see it now, because we've gone back to now. We're back to it now. And this is something we were supposed to have this conversation last week, but like since that time last week, I mean, there's been this explosion in which Adams has announced like more cops on the subway.
Yeah, I mean, but that's what he's going to do. And I looked at his plan, and most of his plan is surveillance and more cops. And there's token ideas of youth employment. All right, hold on. True. Lower it. You got to lower it. Don't make me get Eric Adams on you. Thank you. Lower it, True. Oh, thank you, baby. I love you. Thank you. All right. See, where's Eric Adams and Anita?
Where's your Eric Adams?
Daddy. But I'm here, True. You don't have to worry. I'm always here. So the thing with Eric, the thing was that when I looked at his plan, most of it is surveillance and increasing patrols, right? Giving people the illusion of safety, giving them the feeling of safety, but not necessarily getting at the root cause, which is going to recreate this problem over and over and over again. And so the disconnect is, I think, obviously, in part, there was deep sexism and homophobia directed towards the BLM leadership. I also think, though, to be honest, that I can feel this coming. This is the other thing I'm scared to say. The reality is that that when you look at some reports about the BLM and the friction and the divides that happen within the leadership and how that flowed all the way down. So this person was accusing this person of being a media star, and that person was confused by where's the money. And so because of the self-division that happened within the movement from the very top going down to the bottom, that imploded huge amounts of the momentum of that movement. So that, and also, to be honest, is that new? Have we not seen that happen on the left time after time after time, where a movement starts to get traction and then there's division and fights at the very top of the leadership. And because people are looking at them, the minute that they stop and they break up, the whole movement, it's kind of like a domino effect, because everyone's so idealizing them and invested in them and has internalized them that whatever they do, now we do, right? And so, BLM kind of stumbled over its own feet in a lot of ways. So some of it was outside pressure, sexism, homophobia, police repression and brutality. Some of it was inside pressure, personality clashes, mismanaging money. And then finally, the last thing is that it was the very structure of having a decentralized network, which was really powerful and good, but it doesn't offer people something that they can see as sustainable. So there was one thing, like a brick and mortar place that people can go to. You may agree or not agree with Al Sharpton. You may like him or not like him. You may hold his past against him or think that he's a great leader. But you can go to the building. National Action Network is right there. You can knock on its doors. They're easily accessible.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I'm just saying is that different organizational structures have strengths and benefits. It's not about fetishizing one over the other. It's just saying which one is effective for the moment that we're in, and how do we transition from one form to the other, because the circumstances have changed. So maybe at some points you do need more decentralized. Maybe at other points you need more of a hierarchical command structure. But it's not about one's better than the other. It's just what is useful for the moment. And all this comes back to Eric Adams, is that Eric Adams didn't have a strong left, even in New York City, they had to really contend with. And so, he could just go and sail right in. And if he floods the streets with the cops, like his plan is going to do, and he has the surveillance, my fear is that what it's going to teach us, that surveillance, it's going to teach the working class of New York to surveillance young men of color as the problem, mostly Black and Latino, as the problem. And if that continually happens, we're going to lose track that these young men are also our sons, our brothers, our uncles, and that on one side you see this almost kind of ghetto brute, right? To use like the old kind of stereotype prejudice caricature, the brute caricature from and post Civil War, the ghetto thug brute. But then on the other side, that's my son, that's my cousin, my nephew, that was my father. And so for those of us who are within the circle of color, the question for us is a deeper question, which is, well, what hardened his heart? How did he get a gun in his hand? Why did he use drugs to put his heart in a freezer so he doesn't feel his own feelings anymore? Why does he look at the future and just see nothing but a closed theater curtain and there's no way to get past it? Like what happened? So we ask those questions. And so that's why I'm like, Brother Adams, ask the same questions that we're asking. We don't look at these, we're not asking for just surveillance of our young men. We want to save them.
Right.
How do we save them? And that's why I'm fearful that what he's going to do is that he's going to give working class Black and Latino and Asian New York permission to demonize its own men.
Which is, I think this is something that we've always talked about, because there's always been there's always been a tension originally around the original crime bill, the Black leadership, right? Criminalizing Black youth, saying that, and sometimes I think that there's a confusion. Let me just put it this way, right? Like I think there's always a worry around, well, let me just. I'm sorry. I got a little brain fogged in the question, but I think that the point that you're raising is a really key one, because it goes back into the question around how we organize ourselves and how do we build like these communities. Because the fact of the matter is that it's also an extension of social capital, and who gets to be a citizen and who doesn't get to be a citizen. And the feeling that I think a lot of Black men in the city feel like is that they're not citizens, because when you talk about the homeless population, it's mostly Black men. Let's just face it, right? The people who've been impacted are mostly Black men. It's mostly Black men who are sleeping on the D train, who are asking for money on Grand Central. You know what I'm saying? they've been cast out of the city, and they've missed out on the New York City of opportunity, right? New York City used to be a time when, you came to the city, CUNY was free. You can get a job in the city, and you can retire to Florida with nice benefits. Like Eric Adams, ironically, is saying that's no longer a case, right? And this has been going on beyond Adams, but like the impact upon Black life. And this is the thing that thing is really the thing that hits me hard, is that impact of Black life is that our identity has been shifted in this moment. And so what I think also Adams kind of plays into is something that I think is around also this, like someone like, like I saw him the other day with Fat Joe, right? You know what I'm saying? And it's funny because like
all the way up.
It reminds me of like the 70s when like my dad, like people used to say like the cops and the drug dealers hung out at the same bar, right?
Yeah.
And so, you know what I'm saying? Fat Joe. Yeah. So like Fat Joe is doing to the Bronx what Jay-Z did to Brooklyn. You know what I'm saying? Like he's sitting there as the kind of arbiter, and Fat Joe can do it because he's Latino, but he's cool with Black folks. He's like he has that narrative around himself. Puerto Rican, you know what I'm saying? So he has a representation of a particular type of coalition that elected started politics. But more so than that, what Adams and Fat Joe in that combination, figured out is that this idea of nostalgia, right? This idea of the way that we look back at the past historically is kind of like being like, I'm looking at you and I need you because you're the last person of the old New York that we used to remember, that used to be the land of opportunity for us. That old New York that our parents came to as Southern migrants or as Puerto Rican migrants, like that old New York. And I think that's something that's also equally dangerous because people get caught up in the nostalgia without really looking at like the historical moment of now and what we're contending with. And I think what we're contending with is that deeply allied with capital, deeply allied with technology, deeply allied with real estate interest, but more so than that, he's deeply allied with this really, I would say, the police have become the third estate in New York City.
Yeah. Yeah.
The police are an integral part of the ruling class of the city. And more so than any other city in the world, probably. But it's unbelievable into which
this city is one of the most important cities in the world.
Right.
In terms of capital, and not only actual capital, finance capital. It's not the only. I mean, there's other stock markets, and stock market itself is a bit of a myth, but finance capital, real estate power, but also because of how it represents finance capital throughout the world. Both finance capital, just in terms of just raw numbers of money flowing in and out of the city, but also in terms of the secular hedonistic pleasures, the sex parties, the kink shows, the incredible art pieces that happen to be in some rich person's living room. One of my friends visited some rich person's thing, and there was I think like a $2 or $3 million like dinosaur head skull or whatever in the guy's living room. You know what I mean? So New York, and because New York is a city of collisions, it's not everyone kind of knows someone who knows someone who knows someone. So in New York, poverty and wealth are kind of within 6 degrees of separation either way, especially for those of us who are in the middle strata. But to your point, more particularly, nostalgia is a hell of a drug, and romanticism is a hell of a drug. And America never stopped worshiping the Wild West. It just turned it into the hood. And we have worshipped young men shooting other young men with guns, whether it was a gunslinger on a horseback or a young, Nuyorican hanging out of a car as it does a drive-by. And we've built a whole narrative. And look, hip hop at this point, and I don't think I'm saying anything particularly newsworthy, has been co-opted by corporations now for almost 30 years. And so
Mm.
for 30 years, we've had a corporate driven narrative of the hood, which is in a sense replaced the American West. And what that does is it romanticizes violence and it gets a lot of our young men killed. And I know because I barely survived it.
Mm.
And I know other men who barely survived it. And I'm glad that I lost my cool because I didn't lose my street smarts. I don't think there's some things you never really lose, but I'm glad that I lost my cool. I don't need that. And I know that a lot of guys died for their cool. And so my concern is that this kind of nostalgia for like the hardcore 70s and 80s traps us not only in the past, but a very unhealthy role that we're playing in the kind of cultural imaginary landscape of America, where now we're the cowboys and Indians, but now we've got badges and gang colors and crew names.
Mm.
And I think that the recent celebration, I'm sorry, not celebration, the recent funeral ceremonies that were thousands of sea, a river of blue, was a way of the ruling class now reasserting this control over the streets through Eric Adams, who has an authentic connection with the police. Through him, can now reassert law and order on the streets that was disrupted by the George Floyd protest. And
Mm.
so now the New York ruling class can feel like we've got someone who is both armored against the leftist political attack, has credibility with the working class and the police, and is also not is cozying up with the real estate and business community, saying we need more business in New York. And so he has all these kind of conflicting um, bases that he's trying to navigate between and playing one off the other. And so right now we're in a place where neoliberal control has been reasserted through the tragic and fucked up killing of those two guys who were just there to do their job. And for the most part, it sounds like they were trying to help. And they got shot. And the ceremony following that, the funeral march, was not just about those men getting killed. It was also about reasserting a neoliberal control over the streets.
Mm.
And and so that's where we're at right now. And how are we going to answer this particular moment? Because the big projects that we need to lift whole generations out of at least the cycle of poverty is number one, you gotta start creating whole new jobs by extending the subway system. You gotta green the city. I mean, if you want New York not to get drowned, either by cars or pedestrians, we need a lot more transportation. If you want New York to be able to breathe, we need a lot more affordable housing. And if you want New York to be sustainable beyond climate change, which is hitting us already, then you need for it to be greened. Those are millions upon millions of jobs. And what that could do is that could change the citizenship of our mostly young men of color away from thinking that the best thing they can do is recreate the American West and the American ghetto and
Right.
start actually feeling, not feeling, but actually with the hammer in their hand, with the plasma torch, with that big circular saw that cuts open the streets, they can feel that now they actually own the city because they're rebuilding the city. So they can
Mm.
actually own the city and the city now owns them. And they're no longer these toy figurines and this, cops and robbers routine that we've been doing. But now they're actually citizens of the city. They're real New Yorkers. They're not just the victims of New York. They're not just keeping it real New York. They're not just law and order New York. They're not just New York Post New York, but they're actually real New Yorkers who are taking the steel and the metal and the oil and the grime of the city and rebuilding it into something that could last another 100 years. So that's what we need. We need to invite them. We need posters saying we need you to help rebuild New York. Now that's one thing. And then the other thing is not just escaping from the cycle of poverty, but you really do need mental health centers and conflict negotiation therapists at pretty much every Section 8 housing. And you need a lot of them. You really need an avant-garde of therapists and cutting edge, treatments to start breaking down the abuse that's passed from family to family. Because you can rise out of poverty, but that just means you're going to use your money for chemical escapism, or you're going to just try to go into the middle class or the upper class and try to escape from the trauma of the street rather than trying to realize that in a new world, the street doesn't have to be traumatic.
Mm, I mean, like I said it before, you're a poet and you know it, because I think that was a very poetic way of illustrating a vision of the city. Like I've oftentimes said that, we need a situation where the MTA helps put Uber out of the MTA needs to hire every
Yeah,
black every black female, every Latino female,
yeah,
18 to 36, and put Uber out of business.
yeah,
So the post office needs to hire every my family. The post office was hiring in mass,
yeah,
right? And
yeah,
so that's the question of the generation that we have, because we are losing them to the street, like you said, and we're certainly losing them to not only to the street, but like the pressure of the street is intense around this gentrification. I live in the North Bronx. I know every night there's something going on in the North Bronx. The,
something. Yeah,
yeah, like some shooting, stabbing, mugging. I know for a fact that the generation that I grew up in, our families moved to the North Bronx because that space got opened up after the ethnic New Yorkers left the North Bronx, and we were like, oh, this is a new promised land. We're going further up north. We're going to have the opportunity to have bigger apartments, cheaper
yeah.
rent, better schools, and
Mm-hmm.
then what's going on now,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of that, is that we're seeing that there's an encirclement by forces of gentrification. So every time you walk around in the Bronx, there's a new building that's going up. Do we know this building's going to be 100% affordable? You look at online, it says there's about 5 apartments for poor people, 95 apartments for like rich people.
Come
Who's
on.
going to be? And so then,
Yeah.
then what is going to be the rationale? What is going to happen? But that encirclement causes more and more pressure, and
Yeah.
more and more,
Yeah.
more. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, but what you're talking about makes a lot of sense, because there has to be an equilibrium in terms of the role of New York. New York has to get back in the business of actually caring.
It
That's the
really
thing.
does. Yeah, it does.
It does get
Yeah.
back to caring. You know what I'm saying?
And it can't just be like, then that's the thing, liberal reform pity. I mean, it does a lot. It does.
Right.
Liberal reformism, does increase programs and have job programs and, has some basic amenities. Yeah, sure, of course. But it's not sustainable. I think what's sustainable, because pity is not sustainable. Love,
Mm.
love is. And so I think the hardest thing, I think about being working class and poor, and then obviously homeless, is that the lower you go in class, the less images that you have through which you can love yourself.
Mm.
And the images that
Mm.
we get are usually, obviously now, are celebrities, and of our celebrities, actors to some degree, but because they star in like other stories. But mostly our musicians, because musicians usually try to star in their own story. And so our
Mm.
rappers, our R&B artists, our reggaeton, our salsa, artists, our merengue artists, you know, dub artists, all of these jazz. It's like, and often what you see is that they've internalized the Horatio Alger up by your bootstrap, right? But it's almost like, instead of up by your bootstrap, it's up by your, like, your cocaine, you know, measuring scale, right? And so
Mm.
they always like have these up by your cocaine, drug deal stories. And what happens is that, like, then that means that we get this image constantly drummed into our heads that you either sell ass or sell drugs, or you're just the fucking awesome guy. And then you get up in class, and you then 3-4 albums later, you're like Nas, you're talking about being in Paris. You're like, Kanye, you're talking about, how wealthy, how hot your woman is, even if she divorces you. Like, you're talking about all this. And it's very hard to find images of people who are working class, who live working class, get old working class, and die working class, through which you can just say, I love myself as a working class person. And this is telling my story. It's not a story of leaving the working class. It's a story of dignity within the working class, and having enough solidarity and class consciousness to take back the surplus profit, to take back the money that we make everyone else, and make it so that our kids have beautiful high-tech schools with teachers who aren't stressed out, that we have good daycare, that we are able to work less hours so we can actually be a human being with other human beings. I think part of the goal of the working class is actually less work and being more time to be a human being. But you
I mean,
need solidarity. And it's hard to achieve that when you're in a culture where, like, okay, where are the working class images that show me, that don't romanticize me as, the Cinderella maid in Manhattan, J-Lo, who's going to get rescued by the wealthy, that don't demonize me as a ghetto thug, that don't have pity upon me. Where is the working class images that just show me as me, and my complexity? Where is that? And I think it's hard. And so that's I think not the only, but it's one of the stumbling blocks towards achieving a class solidarity that would make us real New Yorkers rather than the wards of the city.
Well, I mean, I think that's. I mean, I definitely think that's true. I mean, like, I think that those aspects of what you're talking about, and I think sometimes, like, I think it's Aesop Ferg. He says, "Cash ruins everything around me."
Yeah.
Really, you know what I'm saying? And like, and there's too much money in New York. There's like, I'm saying, there's money in New York that the issue around the issue that when you wake up in the morning, you don't feel a sense of pride when you go to work. You have that question to yourself: am I doing the right thing? You know what I'm saying? And there's too many jobs in New York where you're sitting there all the time saying, am I doing the right thing?
That's real.
Enough jobs in New York where you're saying, I built that, or I taught that, or I felt that, or like, it's like that thing. It's like, did I do the right thing? And so it drives people insane because there's a domination of cash in the city, but there's not a domination of love, and the domination of care. And
and you experience it. I think right now, the spiritual state of the city is in a very interesting place because it goes through changes. And again, after 9/11, there was a lot of solidarity in the city. People were looking out for each other because we didn't know what was going to be next. There was a lot of love. New Yorkers were for New Yorkers, and we were
and also lost during the George Floyd rebellion too.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Yeah, a lot of love in the George Floyd. I remember my mom and my uncle telling me that there was a blackout in New York that happened in the early 60s, and it was very peaceful. People just helped each other out, right? And there was for a lot of reasons of that. Some of it, the city was more solid, but at the same time, there was racism, and the police were a little bit more, hardened. But there was this sense that the crime wasn't that bad, and people were helping each other out. There was a kind of communal air in the city. 1970s, there was another blackout. The city got ripped apart. And that was after the city had really kind of broken down out of necessity from the eruption of a lot of racial anger and grievance and class grievance against the corrupt city police force, against the inequalities of the city, against the Vietnam, all of it. After 9/11, there was a blackout in 2004, 2005. Blackouts always tell you the truth of the city. It was very peaceful. People were helping each other out. The city had shifted. And so the city's spirit goes and shifts, it moves, depending on what we all experience together. And the thing about city in New York is very different than LA. LA, the weather's nice. It's beautiful palm trees. It's great. It's very physically warm. It's spiritually a cold city. Because you go out, you don't see anyone in the streets. You don't know what's going on in the city. Everyone's in their little four-wheeled bubbles of tin and metal and glass, listening to the radio or to their Spotify, but everyone's isolated. And it's hard to maintain a connection. You don't know what the city feels like. New York, it could be cold, ice could be freezing on your eyes. But you step outside the subway in New York, you know exactly what the vibe is on that street corner. You know if everything is chill, everyone's having a good time, just kicking a couple of back, everyone's talking, someone's flirting, someone's kicking it to this person, a bodega guy's laughing, or it's like shit, someone just got hit, there's an accident, people are around, is everyone okay? You also know if someone got into a fight, you're like, oh yeah, yo, stay away from that shit, or someone, police just came, instantly you see on people's faces. New York is a warm city. We're feeling each other all the time. We're in this fish tank and we're all swimming in each other's currents. And so emotions go through the city quicker because everyone sees it on each other's faces and it flows through the city. And so we all feel through the subways, through the streets, we feel each other. And emotions can go from one side of the city to another. So, that's what it's like being here in the city. And it's one of the most beautiful parts of the city. And it's why I think, when the soul of the city shifts, when something like towers fall, with ships, when there's an image that we all know is true, when George Floyd is killed, when Eric Garner is strangled to fucking death in front of our eyes by an illegal chokehold. And we know that that is a symbol for all the small ways that we're all being strangled by race. Are we all getting stopped by cops? No. Are we all getting stopped and frisked? A lot of us are, but not everyone. Are we all getting shot dead by cops? What, are you a fucking idiot? No, of course not. But there's so many small little ways that we are sabotaged from the past, from the present. We do it to ourselves, others do it. And so when we see him getting killed, we know that feeling because a little bit of us got killed. And so when we're out in the street, and I remember because I remember before BLM protesting, marching at the Sean Bell protest march when Sean Bell was killed by 50 shots by the police. And it stuck out to us because they shot 50 shots. They're like, how many shots do you need? And of course, the question is like, when did it go from protecting yourself as a cop to this anger that this black man would not obey you? When did it tip into racism? Was it that bullet 15? Was it bullet 34? Was it bullet 41? When did it become racism? Like why did you keep shooting? And everyone had that question in your head. Why did you keep shooting? You know, like, and so, and especially because he was going to get married the next day. And I remember going to his funeral. Al Sharpton was giving the eulogy. I remember before the eulogy, I was at his funeral. We all passed by, and it was like watching the 21st century Emmett Till, because his family wanted us to see what they did to their son. And I remember looking at his face, and he was such a handsome young man, you know, and he almost looked like he was sleeping. He just wanted to touch his face to wake him up. And when we went outside and the streets was hot, man, people were boiling, they were pissed. And then eventually the marchers took off. And I remember following those marches at the peak. And it was mostly all black and brown people, maybe some white communists. You know, white people hadn't joined in yet. It was all black and brown. And I remember then when it started to ebb off. And I remember 2 to 3 years after Sean Bell was died, I went to a small gathering of maybe 200 people in Queens, and his father was there, and he's like, we're going to keep going. And I looked at him and I just felt so sad, because I was like, you may keep going, but I think the people have kind of gotten off the train, and the wave had ended. And then, but everyone still had that image in their head. And then when Eric Garner hit, when George Floyd hit, and there was this fine, it just bursted. It was just done. People, the anger came out, the love for black men came out, but the anger also came out from so many of us, and we just exploded. And so again, it just flowed through the city, and people were just amazed that there was this much emotion that was being bottled up. So, you know, that's the thing, that one of the reasons that New York is special, and I think all cities in which people are living on top of each other are special, is that emotions pass through us very quickly. And it's that emotional lightning that passes through people is something that can't be surveillanced or stopped. So there's always an element of populist danger, because you can't stop humans being humans. You can't stop our feelings jumping from one face to the other.
Right. And I think that that's also something that is something that I think it's super, you know, there's always this kind of like split between the coldness of the building and the coolness of the buildings, the sleekness of the building, and like, excuse me, and the rage and the actual feelings of the people, right? And something that you brought up in the article, to go back to the article, is this whole high energy around swag.
Oh yeah.
Swag for me is it's interesting, because I've been wrestling with swag. You know, and maybe this is an interesting way to go into, like, and also I don't want to keep you up all night, but I do want.
You're good.
But like swag for me feels like shiny suits, like ring lights.
Yeah.
It feels like New York One. It feels very glossy to me, right?
Yeah, I know what you mean. I know.
It feels like a soundbite. It doesn't feel to me organic. And you know, and somehow we're taught to aspire to that, because there's a level in which there's an ascertaining of power within swag. Whereas it's like most Black people or contained within the idea of failure and non-positive. So like I remember like maybe I'm dating myself, but I remember in the early 2000s, it was like, oh, like you're bougie ghetto, that's so ghetto.
Yeah.
And like and ghetto was seen as a site of failure. Like you attempted to be a part of the ruling class. You attempted to have power, but you failed.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? And so the style became the attempt at failure. Whereas when I was growing up, and like, mind you, I'm born in 1976. So I'm in the tail end of the soul movement.
Yeah.
Tail end of like the civil rights movement, good times, you know what I'm saying? All that stuff. Like the ghetto was still a place of love.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
You know what I'm saying? The ghetto was a place of like solidarity. When you
solidarity,
said I'm from Harlem, I'm from the ghetto, that means you came from a place that had a richness to it.
Well, it had soul, you know what I mean?
It had soul. It was non-commodified energy.
Yeah.
Right. And I feel like there is this kind of thing where it's like, it's tragic to me because the more we talk about swag, the more I realize I miss soul. You know what I'm saying? And it doesn't, and I'm saying, the latest black, I hate to say it like this, but the latest black-owned bistro down the block, God bless them, I love them. You know what I'm saying? I'm happy that they're doing what they're doing. But you know what I'm saying? That don't really, that to me don't speak to me. Because that to me is just like, you're taking the little bit of the recipe, but you're like, it's like my cousin used to say, you know what I'm saying? Like, you're hiding the watermelon and the cantaloupe.
Oh, shit.
You know what I'm saying?
Bro.
You know what I'm saying?
I mean, they're both juicy.
You're hiding a fried chicken in the salad.
Oh, I know.
Yeah. You're not taking a fried chicken and eating that shit off the bone.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, you're like,
watermelon, because you're afraid of the white people. So you'll put it in a little bit of, you put the watermelon.
You're hiding it. Yeah, you're hiding the funk.
Cantaloupe, some bananas, you hide it.
Yeah.
To go just get the watermelon, right? You really want to go get the real deal.
Real deal.
And that's what I'm afraid of, this thing around swag, because swag don't feel real to me.
I think we might. Okay, so I hope I can say this without it being a generational hang up or blind spot. But I think when I see every wave of protest leaves at the top, the crescendo of that wave, it leaves a new sector or a new section of the people in a higher class. And then when the wave goes down, a lot of the activists, not all, but some of the activists and some of the working class people just wind up going back into where they were. But there's always a section. So the civil rights movement, I mean, there was always a black middle class, but there was a sizable black middle class, obviously after World War II, when the federal government had to open up the war industry, and there was a lot of migration from the South. So there was an emergent black middle class, or at least lower middle class, because of the federal government opening up jobs, right? And then obviously with the civil rights movement and the Black Power movement, ending with black control of a lot of cities, that again, now there was more kind of city jobs that were being opened into people of color. So with every wave, there's always a sector that kind of gets a higher perch. And at some point, there's like a critical mass. The same thing with George Floyd. I don't know how many, because got book deals and shit like that. People were just hungry for that. But the price that we pay for upward mobility. It's the price we pay. The price we pay is that we have enough space to heal from our intergenerational trauma. We can go to therapy, maybe do some psychedelic therapy. We can go to kink parties, sex parties, and be more explorative about pleasure and hedonism. We can go to festivals. Who really wrote about this? Torre wrote about this, and Who's Scared of Post-Blackness, which is basically documenting all of the cool stuff that he did as an upper middle class black man from his. And just like, why can't I do all these things? So he's, that was kind of his, and it was basically saying, why can't I do all this? But the thing is that the price of that upward mobility is actually being invested in middle and upper class culture to the point where um, with middle and upper class culture, there comes already ready-made cultural behaviors, status objects, conveyor belts to further levels of status and power. And instead of creating culture, one winds up recycling the culture that you brought with you, but you also more and more increasingly get the culture that you're buying into. You're buying into the culture. You're not as creative as you were because you don't have to be, because you're no longer trying to create life-sustaining culture in the midst of a wasteland. Now you're in a place of abundance. So instead of creating things, you can just pick it off the shelf. And so the consumer dimension of middle and upper class life winds up taking soul and turning it into swag, taking, taking hip hop and turning it into gangster rap, taking, like it just takes and it adjusts it into this thing where you can just take cliches into your music. You can take, objects and behavior, and all of a sudden now your swag is a really nice suit and nice shoes and you're jive walking, but it's not soul. And so, I think we have to accept that the price of successful reformist social movements is the loss of authentic soul that, because of its proximity to pain, was something that people always had ambivalence about. We always had ambivalence about it. And if you really want to be really fucking honest, we didn't want to get shot. Because next to soul, we saw our soul brothers and soul sisters with their fist up in the air, wearing their leather jackets. And a year later, we're holding up those leather jackets, and sunbeams are coming through because the bullets pierced their bodies and pierced that jacket. And all we're left with are bloody clothes. We had to bury a lot of people. So I think one of the reasons people aren't always down for the fucking revolution is because they don't want to get killed, and because they see a lot of people get jailed and killed or get burnt out. And soul is always close to pain because soul is a way of surviving pain. And so sometimes you don't want soul. Sometimes you want it easy. You want swag. Swag is easy. Swag is comfortable. Swag has air conditioning. Swag has blood in its sneakers. Swag has crispy white shirts. Swag has, kink, swag has Burning Man. Swag got a lot of stuff. And swag is fun. Swag is fun as hell. I love me some swag. But it's not soul. It's not soul. And I think that the price of our success is that we may be incapable of any more success.
Fred Moden once said in the conversation with Arthur Yaffe at the Graduate Center, the irony of the American dream is that it puts you closer to that which is trying to kill you.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
And yes, and it puts you as part of a machine that's killing the planet, and part of a machine that sells weapons to people overseas. And so, but you become more apologetic for the American capitalist machine, for the American war machine, because it's protecting you and your property. Because now you got property. Maybe you got a house.
And that's the thing about, I think that's the thing about like the existential thing about Black folks, because in New York, I think specifically a New York type of Black folks, because a New York type of Black folks, we're in such proximity to so much money. You know what I'm saying? Like it's insane. It's insane. Like nobody. And the thing about it is when I go to other parts of the country, you don't see so many as many ATMs.
Yeah.
New York City is ATMs in every fucking place.
Everywhere.
You know what I'm saying? And now with the with the Omni and the cell phones and this this global technological nowness, like I can beat something, I can order as much food as I want to off Uber Eats, and like somebody's the peonage that's connected to someone bringing my food to my apartment, and this whole entire thing is just like it's insane. You know what I'm saying? So I mean, I think that there has to be a movement of there has to be a decommodification as we're talking about Lent. You know what I'm saying? I know we get in spirituality, but I'm like, we need to go on a decommodification fast no, as in addition to anti-capitalist movements, but this thing about their proximity to money is
Yeah.
so complicated. It's not complicated. It's disgusting.
Well, I think it's what drives the romanticization of the hustler in New York. So there's New York City has a couple of archetype characters that we all know, and the hustler is an ambivalent character. We admire the hustler, but we're scared of the hustler. And we all praise ourselves as like, oh, I'm on my hustle, I'm hustling, I'm on the grind, right? We love being workaholics and we love keeping it real. And there are a couple of archetypes, and what this amount of money sloshing back and forth means that we become predators and we try to learn how to prey on each other's weaknesses, prey on each other's dreams. And there's no wonder why Trump came out of New York. He learned how to sell the good life to people who couldn't really afford it. So he goes, I'll give you the good life for cheap. And so when he got to the larger America, he's like, I'll give you America back for the cheap. All you got to do is pay for it and hate. Right. And so here in New York, there's a symbiotic relationship between workaholic and people who are burnt out, and then their need to escape from that strangled consciousness into something that resembles life. And so then the secular pleasures in New York are really less about secular pleasure than it is about a need for spasmodic escapes from a consciousness that is like the Matrix, just covered with money numbers coming down in green, money numbers coming down in green. Oh, look, there's a car. Oh, look, there's a house. Oh, there's a hot new wife. There's a hot new husband. There's, and it's like the Matrix. And people just need to break out of that. And so there's a symbiotic relationship between the feverish dreams, the feverish pleasures that we allow ourselves as a way of breaking out of a commodified consciousness. And so we're all kind of like circling each other here. And then what that does is it forces open the space for more and more radical, or at least exploitive art. Sometimes it's blurred lines. And then other people in the world are like, man, they're just on the cutting edge. Well, we're on the cutting edge because we're like boxers our eyes are swollen. We're kind of cutting ourselves just so we can see again, So New York is a city of 8 million emotional cutters. And we're constantly cutting ourselves with each other's genitals and each other's credit cards. We literally have a credit card and we're just like cutting our wrist, and out comes tears and childhood sighs and old dreams that we can't do anything with anymore. And we're just going around cutting ourselves. And we cut ourselves with each other's kisses and our cocks and our cunts. We're constantly cutting ourselves with all kinds of things just to feel again. And so New York is kind of a desperate city. If you really think about it, it's a really desperate city. We're desperate to make it, but making it means we have to stop being alive. And then we're desperate to feel something. So then we take all this money that we make and we pay someone to help us feel something again. And it's a kind of fucked up dynamic. And other people look at it and they're like, wow, New York is like the cutting edge. I was like, well, yeah, we're cutting. So
cutting, all right. I mean, and I think this is a thing that we've had for a very long time. Because the way I look at it is like, you can't take away the fact that this city, Wall Street was founded. The first commodities sold on Wall Street were black slaves, and that that wall was created to keep Native Americans out. So automatically, the basis of the city was citizenship for the few and non-citizenship for the many. And and then the citizenship is who has access to that money, right? And who has access, and it's never a question around a neighborhood with its living organic interactions. But that's part of the work of radicalism. I think that the work of radical movements and organization is a rehumanization, a rebuilding of humanity. Yes, and the stopping the insanity. And I think that has to be driven by, what made New York cool for a long time was Black culture. Our attitudes towards work, our attitudes just like kind of like, Black. I love what the late Bernie Mac said. Is like, when white people take a break, they go to their desk and they eat their cheese sandwich. When Black people take a break, you can't find us. Like we're gone.
You're gone.
It's
We're
Tyrone.
gone. Yeah.
Out.
Yeah, I got in trouble a couple times.
You know what I'm saying? So that's the thing. But I think that there has to be a reanimation, and that's the memory, not necessarily nostalgia, but understanding a place of politics, which we did see during the rebellion. We saw this strike wave, this great resignation, this sense of this like, fuck it, I'm not gonna do it. But it wasn't organized, right? It was individuals doing it, and not necessarily like the proletarian organization, not necessarily the Communist Party, the union doing it. It was just people being like, you know what, fuck it, like we out of this bitch. We're gonna do something completely different. And Eric Adams and everybody was like, take your mask off, you know what I'm saying, get your COVID test at home. We're going back into the office. And like, you know what I'm saying, go get your Chipotle at 12 o'clock and be back in your desk by 12 or 5. That's the energy that we're getting right now.
Yeah, we're trying to get back. So Eric Adams, the new mayor, is still a cop, and now the ruling class in the city want business back to normal. And we had this. So let me. If I know this is you're interviewing me, but I'm curious. What do you think? Because we had this spring, we had the summer. We were all out there, even wearing our mask. I remember at the Black Trans Lives Matters rally over at the Brooklyn Museum. It was beautiful, like, with 20, 30,000 people out there for the lives of Black trans people, right? There was this powerful spring. But more than that, just the constant bike rides, people drinking out near closed and shuttered stores, a lot of alcoholism, but also a lot of fucking, a lot of smoking, a lot of partying, people opening up their car doors and getting the music, people putting out speakers, parties at Prospect Park. I mean, it was wild. And now the city elite is like, we're scared of that. And this is where it's like, well, does one have to resign oneself to saying, look, the energy of the people just comes and goes in waves, and you don't quite know when it's gonna spark, when it's gonna hit a high peak. You can try to organize it, but in the end, the people are just too large, too much for you to really plan anything. Or do you take this as like, no, these are all social forces that can be calculated, and we can make interventions to get us over the top. And finally, what I mean by over the top, like actually breaking the back and dismantling the back of the ruling class in New York, and really returning it to a working class city that can actually just have time to be a human being. Like, what's the frame? How do you read it?
I mean, honestly, like I think that I don't know whether or not it makes sense to follow just I have this. Let me just back up and saying that I've been having this internal conversation with myself over this idea around opportunism. And the way Frantz Fanon describes opportunism in Wretched Earth is spontaneity. Yeah. And so like we think of opportunism as a person sitting around like with like a handlebar mustache waiting for someone to fall down and pick up their
yeah.
But like in political terms, opportunism is subordinating the political in favor of whatever the energy is of the particular moment.
Yeah.
And I think that whatever we do, we can't subordinate the political. We have to struggle with people over the primacy of of politics, right? You know what I'm saying? And do the work of developing politics. How do you develop politics? I think that politics is very pedagogical, right? Mm-hmm. And so you're taking the ideas of the masses of people that tend to be very scattered, right? And unsystematic. And then you represent them back to the people in a political program that you test in actual practice, right? And I think that that's where I think that Nietzsche talks about the difference between being historical and historicizing. And sometimes the left can be a little bit more historicizing because we're talking about platforms and positions that haven't really been changed in many years because it hasn't been tested amongst the people, right? And so for me
Mm.
as a writer, I can say this actually as an artist, as a writer, you know, as someone who was in a Marxist organization, who wrote for a Marxist newspaper, you
Mm.
know, my experience in terms of the power of my words was actually handing out what I wrote to people and talking about it. You know what I'm
Mm.
saying? Did it resonate with people? What were people saying? What kind of questions did they have? What were the things that really kind of came out their minds, right? And not dismissing that, but understanding that as part and parcel of the political work that we need to do. You know what I'm saying? And so I think that there has to be a level, and that also requires a level of bravery, right? That also requires a level of being outside the box. Because oftentimes when you're talking about the political, you're going to get more no's than yeses, to tell you the truth. Like, you know,
Yeah, that's the thing.
and like, you know, but it's like, to me, what I'm looking to do is I want to be able to talk to the people who are thinking out of the box as well. But I want to push that middle, right? You know what I'm saying? I want to push that middle to be able to be receptive to radical ideas. And then, you know, when things happen, which they inevitably do, because capitalism is prone to crisis, there's a deeper sensibility in terms of the organization that we have in the
Yeah.
future. And so we need to really be planning towards, like, you know, like you brought up this really good point. Like, you know, we need to be having these spaces, you know, and not necessarily in the spirit of real estate speculation, but like spaces in which the people can go to. But more than that, when those spaces disappear, that the institution of the people are in their minds, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
so like in that, and that's also something from I learned from the African liberation movement. Like the Portuguese,
Mm.
the colonists would bomb the free clinics. They would bomb the free schools. They would bomb the women's healthcare centers. But those institutions were embedded in the minds of the people. And once it's embedded in the minds of people, it can be reproduced everywhere. You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying? And so I think that that's a level of political responsibility that we need to have to ensure in terms of the work that we do. But I think that it has to be done in a lot of ways that requires us to also be bold in the work that we do and really capture people's imaginations. Like, listen, I love the fact that when I go to a demonstration these days, people are still doing mic checks.
Yeah.
Like people who weren't even born, young people who were like maybe just born during the, you know, around the time of the occupation are still using the tools that we lent them over. And that's a
Yeah.
beautiful thing. The
Yeah.
massive tools that we give them, you know what I'm saying?
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. I love that. That's a
Yeah,
great.
but listen, man, I don't want to keep you all going because
Yeah, I know. I got it.
I,
Yeah. But I could talk with you forever.
I said I wouldn't go past that. But I want to say this has been awesome and been great. Thank you so much, Nick Powers, independent writer, poet, philosopher,
Oh,
father,
yeah.
brother. Thank you so much.
Thank you, brother. Takuni, hug. Have a good night with your fam.
You too, man. Thank you, True, for lending your father to the movement for 90 minutes, man. It's been a minute.
It is. All right, I'm gonna go.